So we're here today to talk about really increasing NOI in this difficult time. You'll notice we're missing one person. Luann actually had a flight issue, so I'm going to take over as moderator. I'm also going to chime in on some of the questions. So I'll introduce myself, and then we'll let the gentleman do the same. So I'm Ian Bingham. I'm with Buckingham Companies. We're an Indianapolis-based owner, operator, and third-party property manager. We've been around for about 40 years, and we've got about 20,000 units in the space.
I'm Aaron Moss. I'm with Olive Tree Holdings out of New York. We have 10,000 units, mix of conventional and affordable in the Sun Belt, and we selected a fee manager to operate those best in market.
And I'm Adrian Desmule. I'm a lead strategy and innovation at Greystar, based out of Chicago, and we manage about 3,500 properties.
Wonderful. Thank you. And again, if you didn't hear in the last panel, please use the barcodes on the screen. We'd love to have your questions. Being short one panelist, I'm sure we'll have some time and would love to make this as interactive as possible. With that, forgive me for looking at my phone, but I'm gonna use that to keep us on track here. So, the first thing we want to talk about, again, we're in a challenging time. I don't think anyone would dispute that. I will say, and we were talking about this earlier, I was at NMHC last week for the fall board meeting. I think the sentiment was positive. Certainly seemed a lot more upbeat than it did even 12 months ago in terms of trade velocity and where the industry is heading. So it was good to see some optimism. But with that, we've got inflation, we've got interest rate uncertainty, recession fears. We've got rent control back on the ballot in California and in several other municipalities and states around the country. What are you guys seeing in that space, and how are you on your units combating that to grow NOI?
Yeah, this has always been a game of winning on the margin. And in that underwriting, you don't know what you're getting into until you get your hands around it. And there's going to be some very apparent opportunities, right? The low-hanging fruit. And then there's going to be the skeletons in the closet. And the faster we can identify those, the better. So when it comes to that technology, it's bringing in all the information. So it's going to be from the boots on the ground. It'll be from the resident feedback. And then what you're pulling in, from your resources and the materials, and trying to identify quickly what's the low-hanging fruit. And then what is that expense that's already over that margin you plan to win on? And identifying, what is the cost of the solution to solve that problem? And it's going to be specific to each asset class and really to each community. So the kind of that winning on the margin when all ships rise with the tide is less important. But now that we're in this market where we need to get back into that dialed in underwriting, it's actually focusing and going back and forth on where you're hitting and where you're missing.
Yeah, and I think totally agreed. From where we sit, we see that the core is really getting served quite well. The shopping experience, we know how to activate that. The living experience and maintenance, those we can set up quite quickly in our portfolio. Where we see there's a lot of opportunity is on some of those things on the margin, especially as it relates to utilities, energy, where there's revenue at stake or costs you can reduce, whether it's building-wide leak detection, things like smart irrigation, that actually most asset managers, it wouldn't be in their kind of core wheelhouse, but there's actually a lot of NOI to find in the margins there. And so we've been really focused on helping clients get those things where it makes sense in their portfolio.
So let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about staffing shortages, rising costs, whether that be staffing or across the board, and centralization. Are you guys doing that?
Supporting all of our clients on the journey for centralization, and we've been really focused on it in kind of two big ways. One is with kind of traditional centralization, making sure that for properties where they're large enough and where it makes sense to be deploying assistant community manager, maintenance, and leasing centralization. But we've also found that we can, for certain properties, actually just skip centralization and go straight to just a more efficiently run property with well-placed AI. And so we've been balancing the mix of those two options for clients to find what makes sense for their property. But the payroll cost inflation has definitely been a serious challenge for all of our clients.
Yeah, I think I've come full circle on centralization, or maybe round and round is a better way to describe it. If we have a specialist or a specialist role, and we've identified that person or that skill set, that's wonderful. It's a beautiful thing to connect them with what they love and let them do it all the time, right, and take over that for someone else. But I think we're generally in a field where it's generalists. We need the same people that are really good at sales to understand customer service. And on back of the house, we're going to give them some admin, some housekeeping and homework. So while we're discussing centralization, I think what's more important is that we allow these positions to evolve, that community managers are mayors of a small town, that the sales team actually is data-driven, that they need to have computer skills. And that's going to move all the way through the maintenance team. We're expecting this analysis, or at least that they can digest that. So to me, the centralization is, and even the innovation in software, it's not about turning on the new coolest thing, right? It's not about the computer being your flare gun. It's about letting learning and development train the people, whether they're running their finger down a pad of paper or they're logging into a dashboard with widgets, to know what they're doing with that information, so that they can connect the dots. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how many highlighted cells we have, right, and how much ink is red. If the person who's receiving that doesn't know how to change or to adapt to it, it's just one more piece of software, one more login, one more password.
No, I agree wholeheartedly. And so, we've all been hearing about centralization. I think over the last 4 or 5 years, it's probably one of the biggest topics at any multifamily conference that you attend. I joined Buckingham a little over a year ago, and it was one of the first things I said, well, what are we doing in the space? How are we innovating? Part of my role, I work on our fundraise and our joint venture equity deployment, but I also work to grow third party. And so, that creates and I think you could probably empathize, well, both of you hire us and we're both deeply entrenched. Aaron's actually a former client at a former company, so we go back, and he's hard to work for, by the way. But there was a reality that everyone, I think, flocked to, okay, let's look at that assistant manager role, and right, wrong, or indifferent, we said maybe that's the low-hanging fruit. Okay, let's look at bots and how we can make leasing, a more streamlined process. And is that reduction of headcount? Is that better customer service? What are we going to do there? Buckingham, being a bit of a contrarian, we went to the maintenance piece first, and so we started podding our maintenance. I think someone in the last panel used the pod reference, and we've had success. What we found was, going back to the question of short-staffed, maintenance, we were always short-staffed. I don't care what we did, there was always openings somewhere in maintenance. And it was one of the harder to fill because there are less people going into the trades. And so the cost inflation on that, we kind of looked at our metrics, and that was outpacing leasing and management payroll in terms of percentage-based increase. And so we went through, and instead of hiring generalists, we looked at the who we had, who was good at what, and we started putting people into specific slots and specific roles, and said, okay, if you're great at carpentry, we're going to make sure that our property management software and some additional plugins are going to auto-direct the carpentry work orders to you. And if you're great at HVAC and you're licensed, you're going to start getting those. And then you layer that on, again, using technology that's out there with geolocation, which that's a whole nother struggle. We could talk about that offline, getting, maintenance folks that are in their 50s and 60s to agree to letting you ping their phone on a regular basis to know where they're at comes with its own struggles. But at the end of the day, from a recruitment standpoint, what we found was we did ultimately reduce headcount, but we didn't necessarily reduce money spent. You go, well, how's that driving NOI? Well, through efficiency, because what we were able to do is there was less open jobs because we were paying more, and we were recruiting not for a Tech 3, but for a certified HVAC technician. And so our work order response time has gone down at those properties, and our customer service scores, our Aura scores, have gone up at those properties. So, again, a little counterintuitive going maintenance first, but we've had a lot of successes there. I will also be very candid. So we pulled a property out of the pod because it wasn't working for that specific property. When you're looking at things like that, you have to be very cognizant. The third party thing is one piece. Do all the owners agree? And can they all wrap their heads around 1 week your payroll might be exponentially higher at your property because of something going on, and the ebbs and flows are different, right? The accruals are different for the payroll because of the way that the staff is being spread. And then the property quality, right? We do mostly A and B, but we were very careful to make sure that we didn't too deeply mix the vintages, and we stretched on one, and it was in the early 80s, and we said, yeah, there's no lead, there's no asbestos, it's good, let's throw it in there, and everything else was 90s and newer, and we pulled that one back out because ultimately it was getting a lot more of all of the maintenance time than the rest, and we went, okay, this is an anchor on a speedboat, we need to adjust course. So I went off on a bit of a tangent there, although the podding and centralization was certainly one of our big topics to discuss.
I would say we've seen a lot of value in the maintenance side as well. I think there's been such a hyper focus on getting your sales and rent metrics. There's been a hyper focus there, hyper focus on collections. And I know for us, there are areas where I think we as an organization, took the eye off the ball as it relates to maintenance. And over the last 6 to 12 months, we've been very focused on making sure that our maintenance teams are not only, in certain cases, podded, but also really been thinking about the tools and dashboards that they get so that we can really focus on turn costs and vacant days. And we've seen a significant lift in NOI at properties where the teams had a very simple dashboard and were able to really focus on those key maintenance metrics that can get lost in the shuffle when everything else is going on at the same time.
I mean, I'm going to stay on the maintenance bandwagon. We have a property where you're not going to see it. You're not going to see this, this isolation of staff, lower headcount, but you see it in the margin, which is we've got a vintage product with a lot of plumbing repairs. We hired a plumber. One of our maintenance technicians is really a plumber. And we go so far as excavation, and we're replacing pipe. And so there is enough plumbing on this property that he can do what he loves. Also, he's training up those other technicians, and he can serve our submarket. So now we've got a shared resource that subcontract plumbing, you're going to see it chiseled down on the 8 properties in that market, and it's really coming through one expert. And then I think on the other side is we need to be cautious not to paint ourselves into the corner, because as much as I love to assign that person that loves this part of their job, the assistant manager, that's the story we tell, where this person's really good at sales. We've given them this career trajectory, and now we stick them behind a computer in a room to make, it really shifts their responsibilities and what their focus is. But then we have that not my job moment, right? That now we've differentiated the responsibilities. And so, renewals are handled by the central office. That phone call for maintenance is handled by the call center. And now when the leasing agent is in a customer care role asking about someone's apartment, they've lost that, right? They don't have that echo chamber where they know what it sounds like when someone's AC works and what questions to ask next. So being able to continue to put people in the room where they have their environment around them, just like maintenance has that plumber to glean from, is making sure that our sales teams and customer service are still hearing what's happening around them.
That's a good segue. So the next thing we were going to talk about is revenue enhancement through value add strategies. Specifically, when we talk about value add, I know that can be a misnomer in this crowd. We're not talking about, I was going to say spend 10,000 and get 200 in rent. That's spend 20 now and hopefully get 150. But no, it's more the value add of what technology is bringing to the table at our properties, and how that's impacting NOI. So looking at my notes, you had made some comments specific to renewals. Did you want to share those? Do you recall those?
While it may not be value add, I think that, yes. So one is, in the renewal workflow, right, we're trying to turn on AI, right? And then the whole revenue management argument. But at the end of the day, it all boils down to what we would have asked the community manager, right? Does this person pay their rent on time? Do they use the amenities, right? Do they seem happy? Are they the one that started the dog walking club? Have they lived here for 4 years? This person's going to renew. So how do we drive that back with technology so that we're not taking that, that feedback from someone and paring them away? One of the things, the desperate systems that we have, is that the person who's logging into that, community's Facebook group, the one who's using the amenities, using that key fob to use the gym every day, we don't have that feedback. We don't know that that person loves the community. We don't know that all the dog walkers at 6 a.m. are going out that back door, and we could enhance that space and turn it into a pet park. Right? If we're not there at 6 a.m. and we're not there at 8 p.m., we don't see these places that we could be enhancing this resident experience. But there is metrics, there's data, there's numbers. There's a computer somewhere behind it that can tell us that. So trying to draw in more systems, and it's not just for the sake of data. It's for the, it's what do we not see that we do value, that we want for our customer, that we could enhance had we only known.
And I would say we really look at, in addition to all the kind of resident-facing value-add pieces, there's actually a couple of, to me, really surprising wins on kind of building-wide value-add as well. So one of the things that was probably the most astonishing case study we saw this year was that smart irrigation has a less than 6-month ROI on many properties, and then a kind of clear recurring savings of water and landscaping costs. And it's those little things like that, building-wide leak detection, which we were able to create an ROI around reduced insurance costs, as well as EV charging, and really thinking about how do we shift that from being a potentially NOI loss leading amenity that you're using to drive leases to making sure that you're really actively pricing and doing revenue management on your EV to make sure that that goes from a negative ROI and NOI amenity to something that is actually driving value to the property.
And you are allowed to revenue manage your EV, yes?
Yes.
And it might not be for Ian's portfolio, but in the affordable space, the utilities matter, right? It can destroy the underwriting and the sale. And so without that skin in the game, the old landlord agreement, running your finger down and looking for high usage is important, right? So yes, we'd love sensors. Let's add some meters, right? Let's let the technology do it. But there's also just the structure in which this is important to us. And how good would it feel for a resident who's paying that bill or not paying that bill when we say we've identified that toilet flapper's leaking, right? So we're going to get ahead of this. You don't even have to call in a work order. We're going to let you know that your water bill's higher than the guy across the hall. So there's a lot of energy efficiency that's not just this sensor game, right? It's not the ESG. It's just using the practices, the best practices, and monitoring it, in a structure where it's not overwhelming to the person looking at it. This is a once a month task that if we work in, if we keep in the workflow, we'll actually reduce, the resident's cost or the owner's cost at the end of the day.
And I think when we talk about utilities, it's a very good comment, and I want to dig a bit deeper on that, because as I think about NOI, it's controllable and uncontrollable expense, right? And somewhere along the way, I think we got that twisted and said, oh, well, taxes, insurance, and utilities are uncontrollable. I'm calling BS. At least 2 out of 3 of those I'm calling BS. You get someone good to work on your taxes and you might get the win. That's the rough one. But, I've learned a lot just trying to manage. I don't want to say manage the bottom line because that sounds like we're forgetting the residents along the way, but really trying to drill in. There's stuff out there that and some of you might go, you're way behind the times, Ian. But, there's technology out there that will literally monitor your outbound water. And when I say that, I didn't realize that air bubbles gets caught coming in and going out. And municipalities in larger cities are billing you for the air bubbles just as much as they're billing you for the water. And you can then dispute that. And it lowered, we did that on a few properties in Indianapolis. Our bills went down by like 30%. And we're not talking small numbers. We're talking 5 figures.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we've seen just being on the property management side is that because especially utilities was always considered to be this, uncontrollable NOI, it wasn't an area of top focus for our asset managers and clients. And so oftentimes, while they were so focused on getting all the normal controllable NOI levers under control, there was nobody on the client side that was really focused on figuring out, and they're complex, and at times the ROI of these things, like the you're removing the air bubbles from the water. Like, it sounds completely made up. And so what we've seen from asset managers is that they struggle to believe that these pieces are real. And so we spent a lot of time really focusing on honing the case study and navigating this space on behalf of our clients, so that one kind of excited and eager asset manager on the client side can take it and run across the entire portfolio and help navigate getting these innovations deployed across their entire portfolio, versus trying to educate every single asset manager and operator to look for this at their properties.
Yeah, I mean, while I have enough problems today, I don't need to worry about tomorrow, but, the utility infrastructure is decaying. And so we have more efficient appliances, more efficient light bulbs, right? But their systems are costing them more. So they're going to raise the rate. So when I think about my problem tomorrow, it is what happens when there's a 15% hike on water sewer, right? Or that 6% spike in utilities. So we have an example in our portfolio where we installed the water meters, right? To help us signal, yes, you've got high usage, something's going wrong. And then we're going to go identify that leak. And it's a process, and nobody likes that email because it means everyone's going to run around looking for tall grass or water, or, it's a challenge once you have that information. However, how do we determine the ROI? Well, we didn't get a 6% increase on our expenses that following year, where everyone else did. So it's hard to connect that dot, right? Unless you're looking closely, but you can say, yes, it is the same as last year, and that's untrue for everyone else in the market.
So I'm going to pause. We've got a question, and before we get too far away from the maintenance topic, the question was, what was your biggest gotcha blocking success maintenance centralization? And I know we've both done it, so if you want to take that.
Yeah, sure. For us, it's far and away the technology. So what we equip our maintenance teams with today, to be perfectly candid, barely keeps it running in any sort of digital fashion today. So there's still a lot of paper work orders, team members that don't have mobile digital devices that are set up on the corporate network, and the tools are oftentimes confusing for our maintenance team members to learn and navigate. Typically not bilingual. They're really not ready for oftentimes even non-centralized maintenance. And so the biggest focus for us on the maintenance front was really figuring out the technology for our team members and spending a lot of time sitting with them, making sure we really understood the training, change management, getting them the right devices, getting them the right connectivity, so that when they showed up to work, they went from looking at a printed set of work orders and going back and forth to the supply closet for every single work order, to having a clear view of what their day looked like. So when they left the supply room, they left once, and then went through their entire day. And as we shifted into centralization, the fact that it was digital meant that we could oversee multiple properties at once, and it wasn't, checking in with each maintenance tech at the end of the day to say, hey, did all the turns get done? Did all the work orders get done?
Couldn't agree more. The old dog, new tricks comes to mind, and there was a big learning curve. I will tell you that I don't know his title, but the maintenance manager that oversees what we called our beta pod, and we've done it a few more times, but the first one, he was 34 years old, and everyone was probably 10 to 15 years his senior that worked for him. But his biggest attribute was that he understood the technology better than anyone else, and that was the new driver. One other thing on the controllable, uncontrollable, and normally I wouldn't advocate for anyone's product, and I'm going to mention a name. They're not here. They're not a technology, but we started using something. They were National Flood. I don't know if you guys are aware. They're a Tampa-based company, but they look and and petition to reevaluate flood zones for you. So if you're in an area that is an AE, but it hasn't flooded in 100 years and you can prove that, you can go back and change that. And we're scrambling trying to figure out what can we affect NOI with. And one of the biggest items I think any owner in here can attest to was insurance increases over the last 5 years. 5 years ago, we were underwriting $500 to $700 for insurance. That same property is $1,700, $1,800 easily. So, finding good consultants that can help you reevaluate insurance and justify the reduction. There's a lot of technology too. I'm still waiting. We ask every time, like, we've done all this fantastic ESG stuff. And by the way, that helps mitigate risk, like leak detectors behind all our wet areas and all these things. Can we get a reduction in our insurance? I'm like, that's really cool stuff. No. So hopefully, kicking and screaming, we can get the insurance folks to realize that some of these great things that we're doing are actually to the benefit risk, but we're not there yet.
Well, and really, I think recording those great things, right? So when that day comes, I don't want to have to start a $200,000 project to save my $200,000. There is things as simple as our courtesy officers of security. We use a system now where it's logging on their phones and QR scanning like the mall cops, right? And there's the checklist that the pool's closed, no one's in it, lights work, right? Again, the same things that was being sent on their format, a sheet slid under the door of the manager's office, but we're getting it in real time with pictures and they can communicate with each other. Right, this light was out. The next guy goes the next night. Right, different officer, different shift, and he says the light's working. And that sort of record keeping is what might save the day if there's an incident. But more importantly, it's that when we have an opportunity, right, speaking with a carrier, is to say we have that, and instead of saying we spend $8,000 a month on it, we say, and this is our deliverable. So it's the things we're already doing. It's recording it so we can celebrate it later. Similarly, on the maintenance centralization, it is. The guys with their phone in their pocket that are turning the wrench aren't going to be the ones that are looking down at the running clock, right? And so we need to celebrate them to say no one's been more efficient. No one's knocked out that many miles of that many properties and that many work orders. And calling it out is to say this is the stuff we're looking at and this is the stuff that matters.
So have either of you, either through your owned or managed assets, looked at the products that help to gamify some of those things for the maintenance technicians?
I don't know if for us if it's as much gamification as much as it is getting clear and visible with the metrics that we're measuring. I think what we found when we really dove into maintenance this year was if you ask the average operator what metrics they should track on maintenance, they have like a laundry list of 10 to 15 KPIs that they're like, oh, these are all things I think about. And what we found when we talked to maintenance team members is they're like, I can't think about that many metrics. They're like, I truly will never see, some of them will be green, some of them will be red. Like, I'm just going to do my job and like, I'm not going to worry about them because it's too complicated. And so when we really isolated it down to them of the percentage of work orders completed within 2 business days and the average turn time, they were able to really hyper-focus. And because the technology wasn't quite there, built them custom dashboards where they and their community manager and regional manager could see not only how are they doing against those, but what are the key drivers that are, for those that are not meeting it, what are the key drivers that are causing them to fail? What are those types of work orders? What are those types of turns? And then I think the maintenance teams, even though it wasn't gamified, they really felt like, oh, I actually can control these metrics and I can control like how I get my bonus. And it wasn't that case when we didn't set up the data and KPIs for them the right way.
Speaking to maintenance and gamification, sometimes it's not the app, right? In a prior role, it started with us recognizing that the move-in experience is your renewal decision, right? And then it kind of bled into something else. So what we started doing is we said, we want the maintenance supervisor to walk that move-in inspection with the resident so that we connect the dots, right? The handshake moment, secure that new apartment and inspection. But then what we also started back testing was work orders in the first 10 days. The light bulb, outside of a light bulb that happens to go out, right? If there's a work order in the first 10 days of this person living there, we didn't punch the apartment, right? And while we were using as a reward system to make sure we had the perfect punch, the rent-ready unit, we were looking for it to structure down as to say, this is the thing we're going to identify as being proud of. The maintenance supervisors, the ones that approached us, that said, now I know who my next tech is, and now I know who my next tech isn't, right? So as much as we were trying to use it as a reward system and a structure, and we were thinking down the road, 12 months down the road, they were coming back to us saying, that's great detail because now I know what to train my people on. And it wouldn't have been highlighted as just another work order in the system.
Awesome, thank you. All right, we're going to shift gears a little bit. I want to talk specifically about revenue generating amenities. So, and that's a sticky topic today, right? Because what's a junk fee and what's not? And again, that's a conversation that I'm sure we can go deep down a rabbit hole. But for sake of time and conversation, as you survey your residents, are you finding either through technologies or physical amenities things that are helping to drive NOI?
Yeah, we are for sure. And I would say the amenities, by and large, we feel very comfortable that they aren't junk fees. They're something that you can choose. They're very clear. They're very describable. And for us, one of the biggest unlocks has been making the booking journey frictionless within our resident app. So that has been the biggest unlock for us when it comes to whether it's kind of your traditional longer term, like rentable items, like storage and parking, as well as now we're finding that by moving things like the club room rentals, or in more cases with newer buildings like co-working pods or phone booths and things like that, moving those into the app allows it shifted the process from being something that was pretty high friction. You didn't really know if you could book it or not, and if you did, it was some kind of awkward back and forth with the office team, to something you can do online, self-service. And especially for the things like the phone booths, it really does drive NOI, and it's not something that you could offload to the office team. It has to be done digitally, just given the speed at which people are trying to book.
So we've again, a lot of A and B product in our portfolio, and some of our urban product, we specifically have a large building in Indianapolis called Cityway. And one of the unique and for me, no-brainer amenity drivers was dog walking service. We found a very professional, licensed group that was really well known in town, and they actually approached us, and we were like, I don't know. And to your point, white labeled it, put it through the app, and there's a bit of a revenue share there. But I mean, it's a hands-off revenue share with someone that is well known in the area. And because we just created that access point, and that ease of access, I mean, they had to hire like 3 additional dog walkers for that building, because it got so much traction. So I know that's a weird one, but when it equates to an extra like $1,000 a month and you throw like a 5 cap on that, you go, hey, that's real money for someone else walking dogs. So, unique stuff like that really works.
Yeah, I think this is where my professional character gets in the way of my personal character, because I'm super frugal. I don't like the nickel and dime. I don't want this is like the Costco Memorial Day special. And I don't love this, I want to use the cyber cafe. And so I have to get on the app and I need to, that doesn't feel like my community, like my apartment building. Right. But what I do appreciate in the amenitized, right, buildings is now we have to make sure it works, right? In the asset manager role, what's more frustrating than walking into a fitness center with a TV that doesn't work? It's like, just tell me, get a new one, make it work, right? The cable bill, just make it, right? Like that stands out to us as something. It's like we offered it. It's in our flyer. We got a picture of it online. Let's make it work, right? So I do appreciate the accountability that it creates, going back to that skin in the game, right? We're doing this and we'll do this too.
Paul, did you have a question?
Yeah. Might be a crazy idea, but I'm going to ask anyway. There was something on LinkedIn recently. Childcare and housing. My question is, have any operators ever considered going down the childcare path, providing that to their residents? Would that be an attractive amenity?
It's a fantastic question. I don't know if everyone heard that, but the rising cost of childcare has almost, or in some cases, outpaced rent. And so, in that, have any developers or owners looked at kind of commingling those into a profitable venture? I can tell you, Paul, I've seen it, and the only place I've ever seen it has typically been in affordable housing. And it was almost kind of a hand in hand. I had one market rate client out of Los Angeles who had that exact idea, and his investors laughed him out of the room. So because they, I believe it was more of a risk issue at the end of the day. Just a lot of inherent risk with people's children. But I don't think it's a bad idea. To your point, I mean, that cost is skyrocketed like so many things.
And being that this is Blueprint, right? I liken it to the senior versus assisted, right? Or that gap, right? So what is my risk profile? What's my risk threshold? But building to be future flexible, right? If I'm building an active adult, maybe I build space that could be a cafeteria someday, right? If I'm doing the over 55, maybe I build space that could be clinic someday. I don't know, but we should consider that in the development, in the design phase, is how could we, if, the hurdle becomes lower, if the demand becomes higher, how could we convert and hire in those services? Because it's not my wheelhouse, and I'm happy to admit that, but nor is dog walking, but we figured that one out. So I think childcare is just an inch above dog walking. Yeah, everything turns into a pickleball court, right? If it's flat enough.
So one of the questions we received on the screen here is, how do you get comfortable with offering services to residents that you can't control, i.e. the property manager, in the example being the dog walking service, impacting your brand or your reputation? I think it's a great question, and I think it comes down to vetting. In the same way that I think everyone here has had vast experience with, a door-to-door trash service, right? And that's the first one I think of, because it's not an opt-in or opt-out. That's one of those that it's across the board. You roll it out to the property. It is call it a must-paid part of the apartment experience at that property. And by the way, can absolutely impact your reputation, because there's some great ones out there. There's some horrible ones out there. And by the way, those are the same two companies that'll be great and horrible on the inverse in a different market. It comes down to vetting. It comes down to relationship building. One last topic we have here is procurement, and I'll talk a bit more about kind of our practices there. But Adrian,
what I was just going to say, I think it's an area too that we've found that it's really important for us to shift the relationship from community managers making those decisions and saying yes, I'm going to contract with so-and-so local vendor, to saying this is important. It needs to be a corporate decision, and to have the accountability with a corporate team that's going to manage the relationship either regionally or nationally. But it's been important for us to elevate that to be a corporate decision, not a community decision.
And there has to be some backstops. These aren't handshake deals. These are written contracts that have, some punitive nature if someone doesn't perform, which you hate to take it to that level, but I would say don't ever not take it to that level in terms of making sure that you protect yourself. All right, we're getting down to the last few. Procurement was something I just brought up, and I think it's for us, it's been another driver on NOI. I know your work history. I certainly know Graystar. We all have procurement. We all have forms of someone or teams of people working to drive down costs. But more often than not, that's been material cost. It's getting appliances negotiated. It's getting, the HD Wilmar, Chadwells of the world's negotiated. And we've taken that a step further. And we've gone to regional procurement of things like unit turn painting, and lawn care and pest control. You could do that nationally. I've had mixed experience doing that nationally. But we've found that by driving it regionally, for us, at least at Buckingham, it's worked really well. We've reduced cost. I looked at this right before I came to make sure I quoted it right. It was 18% year over year on the three aforementioned. And it's working. And so I would say, from an ROI standpoint, you can bring someone in. You can certainly look at someone from a regional facilities role that may have those relationships already to be the driver, and then just help them structure it.
That topic for us is a key priority for next year. So if I'm back on a panel next year, I'll have real case study metrics. But we believe strongly that there's a lot of value in that, and it's just something that we need to figure out process-wise how to tackle.
And I might agree that it's a keyboard warrior job, right? It's an analysis, but caution to not be, penny wise and pound foolish. If the team that's receiving these goods, right, if it's taking longer, that 2% calculates differently, right? If now the carpet's a third day, and creating that kind of feedback loop. And I guess it kind of rolls into my biggest concern today, like for our industry, is as we circle the wagons, as we're pulling back our data, as we're unplugging, is where do we get that am I normal check, right? I mean, how many times have we kind of visited a budget or we're looking at underwriting a property and they have no idea they're paying 3 times as much for a paint as the property across the street, right? So sometimes procurement is just a little bit of a check-in. Also, it should be, run it, like test drive it, like a different, a different vendor, a different material. And then have that check-in moment to say, are we doing this right and can we do it better? And sometimes better means paying more and having fewer anomalies, right? It's you work that paint price down as low as you can and then say, we're actually going to pay you $20 more, but don't nickel and dime, right? Every hole in the wall. We're going to give you some easy, some hard, and let's find the middle together.
One last thing on that topic. All too often we were finding, we went out and we did an audit and little embarrassing, but I think anyone who's done this would go, yeah, that's what you're going to find. You go out and you make these national agreements for your paint, for your flooring, whether that be LVT or carpet or whatever it is. And then you hire a local installer or a local painter and you tell them this is what you have to use. And they go, all right, great. And a month or two into it, you notice, hey, maybe that's not the paint that they're supposed to be speccing. And you know this because you've worked out a rebate on that. And all of a sudden the rebate checks start dwindling. You go, no, I did 10 floors of that property. And what do you mean my rebate 0? So keeping those labor vendors, for lack of a better term, honest and utilizing what you've worked hard to negotiate is a key component of that.
And we found, you'll get to hear that it's a common theme for me, but for the data and like making it visible to the team at our scale has been what's really critical on that point, because on the corporate side, we can't chase down all 3,500 properties, paint vendors or flooring vendors, but we can make the data and dashboards visible to our local operators to be able to check, like, did you meet your target on using the preferred vendors? And that feedback loop really helps them stay super focused and holds the people who can actually solve the problem accountable, which at scale just becomes quite challenging.
Yeah, about 3,500 properties. That's just crazy to hear. We're coming down on the 2 o'clock hour. Did anyone else have questions before we move on to the next session? Yes.
Go ahead.
So we can meet in the hallway because I'm going to ask you which of the 3 different tiers of charger are you asking about? What time of day are we discussing? I can tell you that the reality, and I'm sure 3 people that work for EV companies will meet me in the hallway and tell me why I'm wrong after I make this statement. But the reality is, more often than not, I've seen it as an amenity. It can be a break-even amenity. I haven't seen it where I'm going, man, we just crushed NOI because we put 3 car charging stations in the property. I think it's something that's necessary. I think geographically, there's even more demand, in your larger MSAs or your more sophisticated large cities. So you got to do it. You have to figure out what the right mix for your property. You got to listen. Because one of the worst things you can do is underserve it. And then you have residents fighting with each other for not moving their cars, and then they're writing bad reviews. And so it can spiral quickly, but in terms of growing NOI from it, I haven't had resounding stories to tell.
Yeah, and what we found on our portfolio was that about 70% of properties that had EV chargers, they were NOI negative, and oftentimes it was because the EV chargers were set up when they were installed, there was pricing that was set, and then nobody even had to log in to change the pricing. So utility rates went up, the pricing stayed flat, and then suddenly what people thought was a break-even amenity became an NOI negative amenity. And so our focus has been, how do we set a charging cost that is just high enough that you not only cover the full utility cost and any sort of vendor cost, but also over a period of 3 to 5 years cover the cost of the chargers themselves. But we do also strongly believe that they are an amenity that drives leases. And so we're not trying to win the NOI really on the chargers themselves. We want them to be break even, including all costs. and then really drive leases on top of it because of them. Yeah. Yeah. You can't, it's like everything else on property that somebody has to have the login, somebody needs to remember to do it, they need to be able to have the workbook to do the math, to take the utility rate and make sure that they load all the right costs onto it. So it's something that somebody needs to be trained and remember to do.
And this isn't the asset management part of my brain, but you don't hear the no's also. So that person that realized as they were applying that you don't have a car charger abandons the application and never comes back. And I might add that it's not prescribed to class. Just like smart home isn't this revenue driver, right? It's an expectation now. It's kind of surprising if it's not. I would say that, and I don't know the landscape of Uber and Lyft and the EV rentals to become a driver, but there was a landscape where that person that lost their job can go make $200 a day and pay their rent if they can just get to a Hertz and they can get back and forth, right? So I'm actually creating a job center when I install an EV charger at an affordable property. Now, it's hard to button that up, right? It's hard to connect those dots, but it's important to be forward thinking in that if I have a panel and I'm re-asphalting a space because of a pipe, because of that decaying infrastructure, because I'm trying to narrow the margin, right? Is this the time to check in with the city and see if I can get a $2,500 charger posted up here, because now I can say yes.
All right. Thank you guys very much.